And now, what you've been waiting for patiently, thank you all for coming. I'd like to introduce you to the Herrs, a great family in a lot of ways, but they have a great success story, and started in 1946, and I know Ed will talk to you a lot about this, but Jim Herr bought a potato chip company for $1,750, and him and his wife, Mim, really kind of built the business. Today it's over $250 million business. Jim transferred it successfully to the second generation, of which Ed and JM are here, and they have siblings involved in the business. So the second gen is running the business now, and they are in the process of transferring it to third gen leaders. And Troy is here to represent the third gen and talk about how they've been successfully passing it from one generation to the other. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Ed Herr and the Herr Company. You want to slide up here, I think. There you go. Okay.
Do we need the laptop there? It's okay.
You don't? You want to take it down?
Or maybe just close it. Beautiful. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. It's a treat. Mike, thank you for the welcome and introduction, and congratulations to my new friend Rick and Polly back here on what sounds like a great career and giving back as you get into the retirement years. It's wonderful. It's really, really nice to be here today because one of the things Troy and I just love is making new friends. So this is always a treat to meet new people and make new friends. I want to tell you, first of all, that there's some really, really good potato chips on your table. And don't be afraid to eat them early on. Actually, they're better, my opinion, they're the best home fries you could get early in the morning. Troy and I, on the way up here, he had a bag of salt and vinegar and Red Hots, a small bag of each. And so we combined them and ate them together. We have a new product coming out we're not sure what we're going to call it, but for lack of the official word, it's called Mixed Up. So we're taking two of our, or maybe several of our most popular flavors and kind of putting them together. So today we had Red Hots and salt and vinegar. Pretty darn good. Anyway, enjoy those chips, and it's really, really nice to be here. It's one of these things that's a little bit funny in a way, because, or maybe awkward, or brings a little humility to your heart. But when I stand up here, I look out over this group and I think, gosh, I'd love to hear your story. I'd like to hear what happened in your world and your life and your company and your what made your character the way it is. But I guess today it's our turn, so we'll shoot to do a good job for you and telling you a little bit about our family. We're proud of what we've been working on, but please let it be a blessing to you today, and we'll try to honor that you all have a great story yourself. One thing for sure, Troy and I can't take a lot of credit for our story. We can take a little bit of credit, but our credit mostly goes to Troy's grandparents and my parents, Jim and Mim Herr, who are both passed away now. Mother about 3 years ago and Dad about 5 years ago. But they were the founders of our company, and they're the ones that really, along with the good Lord, get the credit for where we are today. So I'll circle back to that here in a minute. I was actually thinking that what I'd do today is, and this was Mike helping me out a little bit, maybe just share a little bit about our company history, how we got started and where we are today, what's going on in our little world there in Nottingham, and then give you a little bit of my perspective as a second gen member on transition and what that looks like, how we work to transfer the business to the third generation, which only happens about, I guess, what do they say, 85 or 90% of companies never make it to the third generation. So we're excited about that. And then I might, if I have time, I might share, they said if you have a couple leadership learnings, like a couple things you learned in leadership over the years. I share a couple of those maybe. And then Troy's going to come up and share the third-gen perspective, how it feels to be a third-gen family member and what it's like to walk in those shoes and how he sees the company from his seat. And then I think we're going to have time for Q&A. And so hopefully it'll be a good morning. And thanks for your support and listening. I'll start out by saying what Mike said. We started in 1946. And in 1946, Dad was just finishing 21 years on his family farm. And that was in Willis Street, Pennsylvania. And back in those days, there was a rule, at least in the Mennonite families, and that was that you had to work on the company on the family farm for 21 years, and you didn't get paid. The only pay was, that was your contribution to the family, and made the family sustainable in farming. And then in Dad's family, when you turned 21, his dad would give you a used car. And then you could decide, did you want to continue to stay working on the family farm, or do you want to do something else? Well, Dad's job on the family farm was, at that time, raising 2,000 laying hens. And he said, I love my job, but these hens don't talk to me. And I want to do something where I'm interacting with people. I want to get involved in something where I can have interchange. And so he saw, as Mike suggested, he saw this ad in the Lancaster paper, Verna's Potato Chip Company for sale on Charlotte Street in Lancaster, and it was $1,750, which he decided to buy. He borrowed the money from his fiancée, later his wife and my mother, Miriam. Her boss was a lawyer in downtown Lancaster. And so he borrowed the $1,750 from this Mr. Wenger and started out in business. Now, the thing that's a little bit funny about that, for those of you who come from a Mennonite background, is that we didn't really believe in lawyers, because we didn't really believe in ever suing anybody or going to court. You're just supposed to stay out of all that. So it was kind of interesting dynamic there. But needless to say, Dad borrowed the money and had a great desire to pay it back for two reasons. One, that he wanted to make sure to honor his deal with Mr. Wenger, and also he wanted to make a good impression on his fiancée. So he started out in this business, and he said the first mistake he made was that he paid Verna the $1,750 on the first day. And then Verna took off and forgot that she was going to be committed to helping him learn how to make potato chips. But he figured it out. He ended up in this transaction with a 1937 Dodge panel truck and two big black kettles and a machine that you could put 4 or 5 potatoes in, push the handle down somehow, and out would come these slices. So he would put the oil in these kettles and figure out how to slice the potatoes and cook chips. And then he would put them in these 3-pound tin cans. You remember the old tin cans, some of you? Be careful. And then he would pick up my mother at the end of the day, and they would go door to door in downtown Lancaster and put these tins on people's doorsteps. Sometimes they would go to the market. That was a big day of sales, right? But the deal was, back then, they would put a tin of potato chips on your front doorstep. Knock on the door, and then inside would be a note that would say, if you enjoy these potato chips, please put X amount of dollars, whatever it was, in the tin and put it back on your doorstep, and then we'll bring you another one next week. So that's the way the business started, kind of one home at a time. And Dad worked. I remember him saying he and Mother worked a lot of hours. They would start at 4 o'clock in the morning, and some of you know this, with your businesses, worked till 11 o'clock at night, and they did everything they could to just pay that loan off, which they did promptly. Ate potato soup a lot, that sort of thing, and just kept going. That's how it all started. So eventually, the business grew, And, that was back, like I said, in the late 40s, early 50s. And, there started to be these mom and pop stores that would start to sell different things. And then lo and behold, there'd be a grocery store open up, So the business started to grow where they could just, instead of going door to door, they could go to the supermarkets. A lot of the same thing that happened in the dairy industry, where you used to come to your door and then they started, you go to the store. So that business kind of took off. Dad's first market was Wilmington, Delaware, and he would drive back and forth. After he got up and gone a little bit, he was the first route salesperson that we had. You've all maybe seen our trucks around. We still have the same kind of deal. It's just a little different model. But he drove the first route truck, and he went to Wilmington, Delaware. One day he was coming back from Wilmington, Delaware, and he got about a mile away from where the factory was that he had trained a couple people how to make chips, and he saw smoke. And no cell phones back then, and he was in this traffic jam because nobody could get up past where there was a fire. And he put down his window and he asked the guy, walking down the street, what's going on up there? And he said, I don't know. I heard that little potato chip factory's on fire. And so he figured out a way to get up there, only to find out that the potato chip company that he had started had burnt, and everything was destroyed. The good news was that nobody was hurt. Everybody was okay. And he and mother, they were married at that time, had a little apartment right beside the building, and it was okay. But anyway, so the next day, the insurance adjuster came out and said, I'll give you, I actually forget, I have to check with JM maybe, if it was $4,000 or $6,000, but it was one of those numbers, the insurance. Here's what your company is worth. Gave him a check. And so at that point, Dad had to decide, he and Mother, let's pray about this. What do we want to do? Do we want to stay in this chip business? Or at that time, we could take that check and we could go buy our own farm and start in the farming. But obviously, they decided to keep making potato chips. And so they moved to Nottingham, Pennsylvania, because at about that time, their local church, they were going to Willis Street Mennonite Church. And Willis Street Mennonite Church was looking for young people that would help plant a new church down in the Oxford, Pennsylvania area. So they moved to Nottingham to help out with this church, not realizing that Nottingham would be situated along an arterial road, a highway infrastructure into the Philadelphia market. So that's how we got into Nottingham, and that's how we started doing business between Wilmington and Philadelphia and that sort of thing. So Dad started, hiring people and making, build a factory down there and bought some land, that sort of thing. Got a loan. That's another whole story, much different back then than it was today. Handshake. Anyway, so we had this arterial access to Philadelphia. So now we're in 1950s. Mid-50s, they moved to Nottingham 52, started going to Philadelphia mid-50s, early 60s. And back then, we were competing almost exclusively with Wise potato chips. This was before Frito-Lay had a potato chip. Frito-Lay started out as Fritos. Down in Texas, they had corn chips, but they didn't have potato chips. And most definitely didn't have anything in Philadelphia. So we were competing against Wise potato chips in Philadelphia. And Wise potato chips, at that time, not so much today, they had a chip by design that was greasier and darker. That's the way they made their chips. And they had a unique flavor. Well, Dad went into the Philadelphia market with a chip that he advertised as lively, light, and delicious. That was his advertising kit. Lively, light, and delicious. And so that he tried to find potatoes that would had less sugar in them, that would produce a nice white potato chip. And cook them just right, and it just worked. And people started loving our chips. And we became the #1 chip in Philadelphia over the years. So that was our first advertising campaign that I know of. So the Philadelphia market grew for us. It's a great market for us. It's a blue-collar city. They love their sports. They love snacking. They love socializing, that sort of thing. So Philadelphia kind of became our home market, our hub for our business. And so we had a lot of growth during that time, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So what we did was we developed that mid-Atlantic market, Philadelphia and 10 states around it. And that's still a big piece of our business. About 62, 63% of our business is what we call the mid-Atlantic region. And that's where we have about 500 route trucks that are serving all the supermarkets and convenience stores and mom and pop stores, that sort of thing. And I was just going to say something else here. But so that was, boy, that was going to be good too. Darn. It'll come back. So that was kind of, anyway, the beginning. Oh, what I was going to tell you. So we started there in Nottingham, and then over the years, in 1968, I remember I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and Dad came home one day, and he and Mother were talking about. And by the way, Mother, Troy, wasn't Mother a big piece of our? I mean, she was amazing. For every spouse in this room, I mean, it's just unbelievable the contributions Mother made to our family. And anyway, so Dad came home one night and was telling Mother, I think we should go across the Delaware Memorial Bridge. And I don't know how we're going to do this, but we might have to buy a straight job or something to help us. Somebody's moving furniture. Help us move our product over the Delaware Memorial Bridge. But we're going to go to New Jersey because I talked to a guy down there named Skeeter Heritage, and Skeeter Heritage had Heritage convenience stores in New Jersey, and he wanted us to bring chips. He wanted us to bring chips into the New Jersey market. So that's what started us building branches. So we ended up with about 20 branches in that mid-Atlantic area, New Jersey, different places in New Jersey, Maryland, different parts of Pennsylvania, and so that's how that mid-Atlantic DSD business formed. Like I said, 63% of our business is where we make the chips in Nottingham, we put them on a tractor trailer, we take them over the Delaware Memorial Bridge or wherever to these branches, and these branches might have anywhere from 20 to 50 route trucks that are taking the chips directly to the store and putting it on the shelf. So that's how that business grew. And then the other 35 roughly percent of our business is where we do a different model, and that's where we either do one of two things. We're either selling chips nationally, which is different. We don't take the chips to the store. We send chips to a retailer's distribution center, and then they put the chips on the shelf. So it might be, like for instance, we're making chips for Trader Joe's, and we send them to maybe, I don't know if it's maybe 12 distribution centers across the country, and then they distribute them out to the store. So that's another piece of our business. And then the other thing that's been growing, both of these areas are growing quicker than our direct store delivery area in Philly there. But the other one is international. So we found out that there's a lot of countries out there that really like the idea of an American-made product, and especially if it's made by an American family. So we're finding some favor out there where we can ship products internationally. So today we're in 49 countries doing. It's a small piece of our business, but it's growing fairly quickly. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So we went from being a one-family business, a one-person business, to today, if you include our part-timers, we have 1,500 families that are represented at our company. So it went from just, in one generation, a pretty small business to a bigger business, not huge, but a little bit bigger business. And the other thing that I was going to say, just as a point of relativity, people find this interesting. I don't know how many pounds we made back when Dad first started in a week. I don't know if we made 100 pounds of finished product or what in a week. But today, I don't know if you've ever been to our factory, but we're making between 5 and 6 tons of finished potato chips every hour. Every hour. That's how many chips we're making today. So it's fun. And chips, by the way, are about 55% of our business. We also, as you know probably, I hope you know, we do pretzels and tortilla chips and popcorn and cheese curls and all that. We have some of the best. Well, I won't. I'll stop advertising. So then shifting gears a little bit, and later on, Troy and I don't mind. You can ask us whatever questions you want to ask us if I miss something that you're interested in. But as you know, probably we're a privately held company, and we have in our generation. My big brother just walked in. He's our executive chairman, and he's 4 years older than myself. And so we have 5 people in the second generation JM. We have an older sister, June, who lived in Atlanta, and she's been on our board almost all of her life. And June is the mother of Troy, who you're going to hear from here in a little bit. And then JM is our executive chairman of the board. We say executive chairman because he's still involved actively in a day-to-day basis. He's partially retired, and after next year he's going to be fully retired and just be in charge of our trustees. But anyway, JM is very, very helpful to me. He's my #1 mentor, my best friend in the business, and it gives me a lot of wisdom and support from his experience of many years working alongside Dad. And then we have a younger brother, Gene, who does all of our potato procurement, and he's also the president of our J.S. Herr Foundation. And then we have a brother-in-law who's married to our baby sister, Daryl Thomas, who does our sales now. He runs all of our sales division, and he's also a good partner to me. And then his wife, Martha, is our youngest sister, and she's involved in our board of directors and our trustees also. So that's that. And then we have third generation that produced, we had the second gen produced 20 third gen descendants. And of course, a lot of them are married. And so out of the third gen, we have, I'm not sure exactly, I think it's 10. We have, I didn't count them up. I was going to ask Troy on the way up. I think we have 10 third gen family members, 8 of which are descendants that are working in our company today. And so that's fun. And then Troy might tell you later, I think, about this track. We call it a track. We have what we call a leadership track, and we have 4 of which Troy's one. We have 4 of our third gen family members on a leadership track, which Troy can tell you what that means if you're on a leadership track. So anyway, let me talk a little bit about transition, and I will be the first to say that we don't claim to have it all figured out. We've learned some things over the years, and we're still learning as we go. But I can give you a couple things that we kind of think have contributed to what we believe is a successful transition. The first thing is that we're really committed to this whole idea of transferring the business to the next generation. You know, we don't want to sell the business, and we love this idea of giving the third generation a chance that our generation had to work together and to make their own decisions and to have a chance to control their own destiny and not be controlled by somebody else. To have that privilege of not only loving each other and enjoying being around each other, but to actually do something together is a great honor. And so we're committed to giving them that opportunity to bless 1,500 families and have influence in the community and the world around us. And as I said earlier, it's very rare that a company gets a chance to pass their business on to the third generation. And as all of you many of you know in this room, it's such a blessing to be a part of a family business where you can kind of influence your own future. So the other thing I was going to mention, several things here. I think we've been very intentional about the transition steps. What we have to do to continue to be a family business. I give my brother JM a lot of credit on that. He's really the one that was real intentional about how do we set up a map forward. What's the path forward to a successful transition? And he asked for a lot of advice. JM's a very humble person, and he asked people, like our legal staff, like consultants, how can we do this well? What's best practices out there? And he did some reading and that sort of thing. Worked with people on estate and succession planning, that sort of thing. We took a very kind of down-to-earth approach and just said, how can we figure this out? Another thing that I think helped our transition is our culture. I think our culture was a big help to our transition. Our parents, I said earlier that they get the credit, they and the good Lord, but they were very, very good people. They had extremely high set of values, things like integrity, to name one. Dad was really, really big on integrity. We tell the story sometimes of when he had back when he was just first in Nottingham there, and he bought a whole farm of potatoes from a guy, and it was a lot like last year where it rained the whole season. And even when the guy was digging the potatoes, it was still raining, and the potatoes came in, muddy and that sort of thing. And Dad put them in crates, put them in the basement, was going to try to figure out how to wash them off and make potato chips out of them. But within a couple of days, they all rotted. They just turned to mush. Never made one chip out of these potatoes. But he kept his word. He said, he told that guy, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to pay you for those potatoes because I told you I would pay you for them. And that's what he did. That's what his example of integrity and honoring a friendship and a handshake. Obviously, things like respect and honoring others has to come in pretty high. You have to have a lot of that in the company values. And in our case, companies have a lot of different backgrounds on what formed their values. In our case, as many of you know, it was probably a big part of the Christian heritage that we grew up with, the Christian principles that helped guide our ship, that helped us to establish and maintain and work on our values. I think another thing was that our family, I mentioned earlier that Mother played a key role. Our family was always close, and Mother did a lot of this stuff where, on a monthly basis, she would just get the whole family together. Jim, you bring your kids. Ed, you bring your kids. June, you bring your, and we're all going, and we go away on vacations once a year together. So we kept each other. Mother kept each other close and interacting. So the cousins spent a lot of time with each other, and it was very orderly, as you can imagine, in a Mennonite environment, in a hard-working environment. Everything was structured and orderly and organized, and everybody knew what their job was. Everybody knew what and the other thing that Mother and Dad were good at, they were good at helping us to learn to enjoy hard work. Do you ever think what a blessing that is? If somebody teaches you to enjoy hard work. I remember when we were just little kids, we would have these Saturday work days, and Mother would say, look, we called it sweep the tarby. It was when we swept off the blacktop, Anybody else here call it tarby? I mean, we would sweep the tarby and rake the leaves. And she said, we're going to work until noon, then we're going to have lunch, and then you can play. And Mother was so good at encouraging us in our work and complimenting us on work. I wasn't sure which was more fun, working or playing. It was just hard work was a blessing. And so we enjoyed hard work. We also enjoyed playing. So, and by the way, Mother was a master communicator on stuff like that. And so the other thing is that we think it's important to really keep that culture alive. So we want to really focus on how the culture plays a part in the legacy and how can we communicate that to the next generation. So we continue to follow that principle that Mother started, where we make sure we have get-togethers. Every year we have up at Hotel Hershey, we have a shareholders meeting where this year I think we had 65 out of 78 or so of our family members there. And we just get together and we hang out for a long weekend and play golf or whatever, and then have meals together and do a little business update, that sort of thing, just to keep shareholder letters, those kind of things, to try to keep communication strong. Another thing that we've had in our company, which I think is the case in a lot of companies, but not all companies, and that is we've had a very high interest in the next generation in working in the company. So the third generation, as I said earlier, 10 of them there, very interested in the company. They loved Grandma and Papa, and they want to keep that legacy going. That thing they grew up with that was so vital and so important to them. How can we help keep this thing going? So we encourage a lot of family members to be involved in the company. And I guess the fact is, if you're not encouraging people to join the company, you're discouraging them to join the company, right? So if you're not being inviting and warm and welcoming, you're kind of putting your hand up and saying, we don't really need you. you got to reach out. You got to be actively involved in recruiting and asking people what their interests are, and how can they play a role in the company. So, and the other thing is, I guess it's possible that you could have too many family members and then make other people feel like, well, I can't even crack this code if I'm not in the family. Like on my executive team right now, I have 10 people. It's going to be 8 soon because 2 guys are retiring. But 3 of them are third generation members. 3 of them have been on this leadership track, and so it's very important for us as family. So we have half of our executive committee is family, and we have to make sure that others don't feel that they're excluded, that they're part of the family. That they're part of helping us make decisions, and that they're on the inside, not on the outside. So that's very important. And then we have in our company what we call a family employment policy. Probably a lot of you have something similar to that, where for the family members, it talks about our views on compensation. It talks about what disciplinary action has to be taken when. It talks about the responsibility of a shareholder, whether you work for the company or you don't work for the company. What is your responsibility as an owner? How do you conduct yourself? That sort of thing. And even little things like, can I borrow a dump truck from the company on the weekend? You're like, what's the rule on that? So that's the family employment policy. And then we have a family constitution. All these things, which JM gets all the credit for putting this stuff together. Family constitution is where we talk more about relationships and what the expectations are, core values, succession, these kind of things, governance. Those things are in our family constitution. So that's all outlined there. And by the way, we're always happy to share stuff with people if you're interested. And then another thing we do in our company is we have shareholder expectations. So obviously we have board of directors. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but we have 5 family members right now on our board. We just had 1 retire, and then 5, which will soon be 6 outside board members. One of which is Mike Mitchell, and so we have people from our industry too that really can help hold us accountable. But then we have trustees, which is that second generation though, and second generation though is responsible for saying to the board, here's what our shareholder expectations are. Here's what we want the board to hold the ExCom, the executive committee, accountable for to help execute the plan. So shareholder expectations are obviously a very healthy part of family transitions. And then another thing we do, which a lot of your companies probably do, is we pay dividends. And dividends are always a way to making shareholders think about, how did the company perform, and what is my responsibility in the company? If I'm getting this dividend, what is my responsibility? Even if I don't work for the company, how can I support the company? How can I pray? How can I encourage, make a phone call, be interested at shareholders meetings, that sort of thing. So everybody's thinking about what their role is. So that's that, and then Troy's gonna talk more about his view on transition, and you'll love listening to him. Let me just say a couple things about leadership, just because Mike asked me to, and I don't think that I'm at the place where our friend Rick and Polly would be, where I can really, I thought it was great what he shared. But I'll give you a couple things that I kind of think of if somebody says, what's important if you're a leader? And the first thing is that I think it's really, really important to be a great person. I think it's really important to be a great person if you want to be a leader, and to work at, how can I be my best? And I'm talking about leadership in your family or your marriage or your community or your friendships or your business or your nonprofit. How can I be the best I can be? How can I be a great person? And one of the ways that I think that we can be great people is to love people, and maybe that sounds too corny, but it's the fact. The best way we can lead is to really, really love people, respect, honor, value, have integrity. Golden rule, when you're writing a policy, put yourself in the shoes of those who are going to be affected by the policy. Take their interest to heart. There's 600, not going to get too preachy on you, but there's 613 commandments in the Bible. 613. And as you know, one day somebody asked Jesus, what's the most important one? And he said, as you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else hangs on those two things. So I come back and I say, good leadership has to do with loving people. That's the number one commandment, love people. Sometimes when I think about being our best, I think about the simple things that everybody can do. You don't need a college education, but sometimes they're hard to do. All right? So I'll give you an example. I have a friend. His name is Mike Quick. And I don't know for you younger people if you know who Mike Quick is, but he was a great wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. He still holds a record for a 99.5-yard touchdown reception. Mike Quick is a good man, and I got to know Mike over the years because we did some advertising with him. And by the way, he was a 5-time All-Pro too. Think about that. It's not easy. But Mike had God-given talent. I played golf with him before, and if Mike was in a scramble and he saw a 20-foot putt and he saw which way it was going to break, if he was the last putter, he wouldn't miss it. His hand-eye coordination was unbelievable. And I would ask him sometimes, Mike, were you always, he said, Ed, I had a God-given talent. He said, I give God the glory for it. He said, everything was easy for me. I played 4 sports in high school, and I just always did great. I went to North Carolina, I think it was North Carolina State, and I got there on a scholarship for football, and I went down there and I broke all the track records. He said, I was just lucky that way. He said, I didn't really have to try that hard. I said, well, Mike, was there ever a time in your life when you really had to dig deep? You really had to go say, I need to really work hard on this, to dig deep. And he said, yes. I'm glad you asked. When I was a junior at North Carolina, I heard that I had a chance of being a number 1 draft pick. And he said that year, I did everything I could to be a number 1 draft pick, which he accomplished. I said, what was the main thing you did? You know what he told me? This is great. He said, Ed, you know what I did? I went to bed at 8:30 every night. Now you think about this. College kid who has a chance to be a number 1 draft pick. All his friends are going out, having a couple drinks or socializing or whatever. 8:30, he went to bed every night. He said, that's what did it. Every morning I was sharp, I was ready to go, I could be my best. Now here's the thing. If you talk to anybody that's in the health profession, anybody that knows anything about how we can be our best, oftentimes they're going to tell you, you got to do 3 things. You got to eat right. That means a small bag of chips every day. Not huge. You got to eat right. You got to exercise, and you got to get your rest. And so my question to you today is, we can do that, right, without a college education. We can do that without a high IQ. We can do that, but it's hard. How many people can do that on a consistent, those 3 things on a consistent basis for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days? And you all know, as well as I do, it'll change your life. It'll change your energy level, how you think, how you perform, everything. But it's hard to do. It's hard to do. So that's something to think about. Just think about that as far as, a little thing that can help us to be our best and can be, in a way, can be life-changing. And the other thing I was going to add, just to this whole leadership thing is, one of the Bibles of business is Good to Great, right? And Good to Great was a book that basically did a study on the 10 most outstanding companies and leaders. And you know what they found? All of these leaders had one thing in common. You know what it was? It was humility. Humility. And I heard a great definition the other day we were talking about at our executive team. Humility is if you have a genuine interest in the opinions of others. A genuine interest in the opinions of others. And I'm the first one to tell you, I need to work on that more and more. But it's so important to leadership, right? To make sure that we're humble. And anyway, so that's another thing. JM's always been good at helping our company to say, look, let's be good at being learners. let's not think we know it all. Let's just say, how can we learn something from somebody else? That's why you guys are here today, to learn something from your peers and people that you work in the same community with. So anyway, I think that's all I'm going to say about that. I appreciate your listening. You guys have been really, really good listening, and you're in for a real treat right now because Troy's going to come up here, and Troy is my favorite executive vice president. He's done a great job at our company. We are enjoying working together and talking about the next generation and his ideas. We have a great, come on up, Troy. We have a great executive team. We have guys on our executive team, Troy and I, that are my age and have 30, 40 years of experience in the company. And then we have a couple guys, as Mike Mitchell knows, from outside the company that came in. They were with big companies like M&M, Mars, and Campbell, so they give us some outside opinions. And then we have 3 young guys like this that are just full of energy and passion and new ideas. So let's give Troy a hand. He's a great addition.
Thank you, Uncle Ed. So Mike and I were actually just talking, so how about we actually take a break? Be a good part of the speech, right? So we'll do a 15-minute break and then come back.
Cool.
All right, we'll bring Troy up here, and we'll get the 3rd gen perspective on hers. So welcome, Troy.
I try the mic. Is it on, Melissa? You guys hear me? All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate being here. Thank you, Uncle Ed, for the introduction. It's interesting as I stand on this stage, I'm actually thinking that I'm actually not the right person to be standing up here. So I actually got my master's at the University of Delaware, but my cousin Jim graduated from E-Town. He had his master's here, and he sends his regards. And if you're a student here or a graduate, he actually had a great experience at this school and is really impressed with the education that he got. So he really enjoyed it. So I'm standing up here thinking, yeah, go E-Town, right? I'm standing up here thinking, as a family member, I should have delegated this task to my younger cousin. The other thing is that I'm introducing to you guys, and I'm thinking, you guys actually have probably better stories than I would. In fact, I'd rather sit in your seat and listen to you guys' wisdom, because I'm just starting in our career here. So at Hers, we're in the transition, but we are far from having it all figured out. And so that'd probably be the biggest thing that I'd like to kind of leave with you in terms of our generation, is that we're really in this learning mode in terms of trying to learn as much as we can from the previous generation so that we can be good stewards of this business. So my talk today, since I don't know everything and since I'm not at the end of my career, I thought I'd give you a little bit of perspective of what it's like to be a descendant and see if that resonates with anybody or anybody in their transition plans. So you can obviously read a lot of books on transition planning and on just generations and how to plan that out. But it's not often that you read a book on what it's like to be a good descendant and what it's like to, what do you expect when you come to your family business. So that was kind of the thought of my talk, was just to think about some things that I've seen. So I've been at Hers for 15 years, and it's just some observations that I had, and it'd be interesting after the talk to you guys and see if you guys have other observations that you see in family businesses just in general. So with that, I thought I'd take just one step back and tell you a little bit about this word back here, entrepreneurial. So at Hers, Ed told you that he has some siblings. We have 4 uncles that run Hers, and so I've worked for them, and every one of them has an entrepreneurial spirit, and obviously my grandfather did. And then on my father's side, we have 3 uncles, and 2 of them started their own business. And then the one uncle that didn't, he was actually a college professor. So I feel like in this room we'll give him a pass. But we're absolutely an entrepreneurial family. Then both of my parents started each their own individual business. So if you think how it was when I was growing up around the dinner table, it wasn't talking about Hers, it was talking about their businesses. And then my mother was on the board at Hers, and so she was talking about Hers. And so in my mind growing up, I always thought that it was just normal for people to start their own business. And that was the plan that I would have had. So if you had talked to me in high school, or definitely when I was in college, I would have said, no way I'm coming to Hers. I'm actually going to start my own business. So it was that perspective, that lens, I guess you would say, that I look at Hers through. And it was actually my grandfather. So he was a great mentor to me. I got into the banking industry and moved out to Colorado, which is where I met my wife. And he was a mentor for me in terms of the finance industry, even though that wasn't his business. But one of the things that my wife and I were talking about after we got married was the idea that she was a stockbroker and I was in finance, and we were saying, what do we want to accomplish in our life, and what's our goal for work? And it's that word up here, building a legacy, that we came back to. And it's like, well, we don't really just want to work for a paycheck. We actually want to do something that we can be proud of, that kind of leaves a mark, or obviously leaves a legacy. And so my grandfather was pointing out that, hey, you don't actually have to start your own business to leave a legacy. In fact, he pointed out there at Herr's that, if we came to Herr's, we could actually build on the legacy of the previous generation. So at that time, they hadn't even transitioned from first to second, and he was already thinking about, I'd like some people in the third generation to be interested in this business. So he was saying, you can build a legacy on the second generation, and then obviously build that legacy for the fourth generation. And so that got us really interested. So long story short, we ended up deciding to come to the company. That was 15 years ago. We've both loved it. And so the observations that we had coming to the company are kind of what I want to talk to you about. But that was the lens that I was looking through in terms of an entrepreneurial. So with that, I was thinking, what would be kind of a unique spot to be would be if you take yourself and you say, I'm going to be coming into a family business, but you didn't grow up there. What are some things you can expect? And the very first one is the one that I've struggled with the absolute most. So being transparent, I hate the word nepotism, which is the idea that you get something just because of your last name or just because of who your uncle is or whatever. So actually that was a major problem for me coming to the business, is I always felt like, well, that's not really the way I want to be seen. I want to be seen as the person that earns everybody's respect. And that's something that if you come to a family business, you have to remember that people aren't going to forget that you got there because you're a family member, and it doesn't matter how hard you work or how great you do. People aren't going to forget that, and that's something that you need to wrestle with as a family member. And still to this day, I wrestle with that. And so the only advice that I can give to a new generation member, somebody that's coming into a family business, is to learn from Mike Rowe. So does anybody know him? He has the Dirty Jobs. He's a great speaker, and he has like a little thing that you say: you show up early to work, stay late at work, volunteer for all the grimy jobs, and just be one of those people that doesn't complain. They just come to work and get the job done. And that's how you earn respect. And that's what we've found as our generation in terms of Herr's is, if we could actually pick, like if we said, well, what are people going to say about us like when we're not around? Like my ideal goal, if I could pick, would be that, hey, Troy is the hardest working guy in the room. That would be the best thing that you could ever say about me. So that was what our mindset was when we came to work. And it's something that you got to continue to do, because you got to continue to earn that respect. But you have to know before you come to business that there's no question that I don't think it'll come back on, Mike. I don't think that you can ever get past that. There'll always be someone that says, well, you just got your job because of who your uncles are. And realistically, that's actually true. Like as we move up in the company, you can say like, well, we got to be realistic in the fact that I probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't a family business. So I wanted to tell you that working in a family business is a blessing. And then I want to transition to the observation that never did come back on, but the observation that's also a responsibility. And so if you think about my new role in terms of working in our business, we have a lot of responsibility for the business, but we also have a lot of responsibility for our family. And so Ed mentioned, I think our math is a little bit different. So I have us at 19 cousins, and then they're all married, so it's like 37, 38 people that would be in our generation. And I'm standing up here today saying, there's one thing that I definitely would not want to do with our family, and that would be for me to get up in front of them and act like I have it all figured out. Act like, hey, I'm this one-man show. We got this thing licked. We have it figured out. And the answer would be, no way. That would absolutely not fly in our family. So our strategy as our family in terms of dealing with responsibility is that we want to share it as much as possible. So Ed mentioned that we have a third-generation track. We have 10 people that work full-time. So your math was right on that one. We have 10 people that are full-time. At Herr's, we actually have one part-time person that are in the family. And of those, we have 4 people that we would list as working in the track program. But in the real world, in the everyday-to-day life, actually all 10 of us are sharing that responsibility. And that's the way that we built our company in terms of we don't want just to be one person, but we want to really share that. The other family that I haven't mentioned is our employees. So we have in the neighborhood of 1,300 employees, and those 1,300 employees have families. So we need to make decisions based on, and we have responsibility for those families. And a fun fact that we actually love is that 20% of the employees at Herr's, we actually just found this out, 20% of the employees at Herr's actually have a family member working at the company. And so what that means is they like their job enough to where they actually invited their son, daughter, spouse, whatever, to come work at the business. And my wife works at the business. So we think that's pretty important if you think about from a responsibility level, that we need to take really, really good care of this business because we have that responsibility. So we also include our employee family when we talk about the responsibility. So shifting gears on you a little bit, when we talk about the business, we also have this program where we're trying to groom people to be able to run the business. And so the idea was that we created this track, and the biggest thing that we're trying to create here is that we give people perspective. So the idea is if you come to work and you only work in your family business, then you don't have a broad perspective of the way the world works and the way other businesses run. So one of the prerequisites for the third generation track program is that you have to have outside management experience. And so what that means is we're looking for people to have 3 to 5 years outside business experience, and we're also looking for them to get promoted in that outside company. And I can tell you, when you can get promoted in an outside company, it gives that descendant confidence. So if you go back to where people are going to say, well, you just got that job because you are a family member, you can say, well, I got a promotion. You never say this, of course, but you think to yourself, I got this promotion at an outside company. I didn't have any family members. So it's one of those things that kind of you can keep in your back pocket. It gives you a little confidence. But the other thing that is really important for us is that we want the person to work inside the parameters of another business and understand how that business works. And sometimes you have good bosses, but you actually learn more if you have a bad boss that you work for. And I'm just thinking out loud that if you work for your family business and you have a bad boss, even the worst boss is going to be nice to the owner's kid, right? Like, so you're not going to get a real experience with working in a bad environment. But if you work outside the business, the idea is that you're going to have to work within the parameters of whatever that business is, and it teaches you a lot. It gives you that perspective. So the other thing about perspective is, obviously, we're in a college campus. In this room, everybody's high education is very valuable. So our business has a prerequisite that you have at least your 4-year bachelor's degree before coming on the track, and then we recommend our master's degree. So that perspective, I feel like, from higher education, and I'm sure you guys agree with me, gives you the opportunity to meet and talk with different people in different businesses. Obviously, the professors are going to teach you a lot, but I feel like in my master's program, I learned more from the other leaders that were in my classes than I did actually the books. And so, again, that perspective that you get is extremely valuable for before you come to Herr's. So that's one of the things. And then the last piece, and actually I'd be interested after we do the question and answer if you guys agree with this or not, because there's a lot of people that feel the other way. But for me personally, I kind of think it's better if you don't come to the business while you're really young. So if you think about when you're 16 and you come to work in your family business and you work summers or you work summers when you're in college, is your head really in the game? Because the employees are watching you. So I just used myself as an example. When I was 16, I was very, very immature. I had a job as a cart boy in a golf course. My job was to clean the golf carts, but in Georgia, where I grew up, the actual job was to get the golf carts as dirty as possible, so we'd take a mud boggin, and then we'd drive as long as we could on 2 wheels. And so if you think about, is that a good person? And you say, no, he's a terrible employee. I was late to work, and I was, had other things in mind. Really, it was one of those situations where if I worked at Herr's, and I'm really glad that my uncles didn't see me in that age, but if I worked at Herr's, employees have a long memory. So you're gonna think, if that person, if they see you doing that when you're 16, when you're 26 or when you're 36, they're gonna remember that person. And is that really the reputation that you want to build? And so we kind of recommend, hey, if you want to work at the company, we'd let you, but we kind of think the other way of working somewhere completely different that's not in the family and get that perspective is pretty valuable. So that perspective goes a long way in terms of our formal education. So the third gen track, again, you have to have outside business experience, and you have to have, or outside management experience, and you have to have your education. But But then thinking of the next observation, this is where we're going to get into like the fact that hers, we know that we're really lucky in terms of we have really good relationships, but that education can also come from the previous generation. In our case, like the founder. So if you're a descendant or a third generation in our case, the idea is to ask your uncles and grandfather a lot of questions. And so I just remember being annoying to my Uncle Jim and Uncle Ed because I'd always ask these questions. I always had to be like, well, why don't we do this? And why don't we do this? And why don't we do this? And I guarantee, they would probably won't admit it, but I guarantee I was annoying because it was one of those things that are like, why does this guy keep asking us all these questions? And looking back, the idea is that we want to learn as much as possible. And so don't be afraid to have that time where you're asking a lot of questions. And it's actually a safe environment, right? Like if you're outside in a Fortune 500 company and you ask a dumb question, it's not really that good for your career if you do that for your boss. In a family business, it's kind of like, no, you want to have them ask those dumb questions so you kind of get that passed in a safe environment. So while we're talking about questions, there's actually the other side. And I was going to use this time for like that break, but my uncle went a little long, so we'll use it. But the idea is that if I'm asking questions, I should be ready for when people ask you questions. So if you come to your family business, one of the things that we talk about with my cousins is the idea of fishing. And so it's not literally fishing, it's people want to fish for information. So they know you have a family business, they may work there, they may be a customer of yours, they may be even your competition, and they're going to want to get as much information, is a nice way to put it, but also as much dirt as they possibly can on you and try to get, what's the interesting little nugget of information. So as a descendant, you want to be ready for that. And you want to be ready for that before you come to the company and kind of think, how's the best way to answer these questions? So I'm just thinking of some questions that would be pretty innocent that we might all ask each other, and that would be, hey, how do you like your job? Right? Would that be a fair, like a simple question? People ask that all the time. If you're a family member and I go and I say, I hate my job and I can't stand my job, I'm thinking about quitting, that could send ripples through the company in terms of, well, Troy doesn't like his job, or there's all kinds of, the family is going to sell, and they make all these big things. Same question is, how do you like working with your family? If you say, I don't really like it, or you roll your eyes, you're like, oh my God, Uncle Ed, here he is. It's not going to be good for our business. So you want to think about those questions before they come up, especially if you want to think about those questions. Usually don't come up very first thing in the morning. They usually come up after a 15 or 17-hour day, and somebody, you're wet from the rain, and somebody says, hey, how's your day going? And you're like, I think, how am I going to actually answer this correctly? Now, the other side of that coin is we also want to be transparent to our employees, and you want to be real. Like, you could be a politician, and they'd be like, well, how's your day going? And you're like, well, I don't know. How's your day going? That's not going to fly. Like, people don't do that. They're going to see right through you. So we got to be kind of like in that balance. But the questions that so those are innocent questions. The questions I'm actually asking you to pay attention to are the ones where people have an agenda, and they'll be more sneaky than this. But one of my favorite questions that people ask is they know that you're kind of in a transition, and they say, you know what, you're really ready for management. You should be in that role already. What are you going to do about so-and-so? What are you going to do about that manager over there, or the manager that's not doing well? Or what are you going to do about the person that you just saw sleeping? And you can say to yourself, like, that question is not an innocent question. Like, they have an agenda, because if I were to say, you know what, when I'm the boss, I'm going to fire that manager. And if I said that in a moment of weakness, that sends all kinds of the wrong messages to the rest of the company about my relationship with my uncles. So my uncles actually hired that manager. And so if I say I don't like that manager, that means then that I'm kind of going around them. So we have to be very, very careful on those questions. Even though it's kind of like a compliment and they're coming to confide in you, you have to be really careful. And so our kind of rule of thumb is that we like to always spin back and say, thank you for letting us know. I'm going to get back to you, but if you don't mind, I'm going to go talk to my uncles first, and we make all of our decisions kind of as a team, and then I'll come back to you and let you know kind of what we decided to do. So you have to obviously be also transparent. Like, if they're telling you something about another employee, you can tell them right off the bat, like, hey, confidentiality, like, we're going to handle this situation, but we're not actually going to tell you about what we're going to do about the employee that was sleeping. So that phishing world, I really can't stress that enough, because there's the employees that do it. Your competition really wants to do it. Your customers are just genuinely interested, so they're always going to ask these basic questions. And I always thought that was one of those things that I guess I never really thought about before I came to the company, but it is out there. And probably the biggest phishing question that I always found really interesting, and I think if I worked for another company, I would ask the family members this too. So we know we have a track, right? There's people that, say you're on this third generation track, and I was the first through, so there's no pass. So they don't know like we always say we were fighter fighters, like wherever there's a problem, that's going to be your next assignment. But other than that, we don't know our assignment. It's not published or years of time or anything like that. So people come and ask you like, what's your next assignment? What are you going to be doing? Who are you going to be working with? And my uncles, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they never actually told us what our next assignment is. So we could rightfully claim, I actually have no idea. I don't know, I just trust my uncles. And that kind of solves that question. But you can imagine if I knew, then the people that know that I'm coming to their next department, they're going to be paying attention. And then for me personally, I always felt like it was a blessing not to know, because then I could just be in the moment. So I could just do the job that I was told to do and not be thinking about what am I going to do in the next job or when I get to this job or whatever. And so that'd be another thing. It's different for different families, but sometimes not telling the descendant the information then allows them to just be transparent and say, hey, I just don't know. But it goes into my next observation, which I've kind of skirted around this issue, but some family businesses don't have this. We really feel blessed that we do, and that is trust. And so I really like when we're talking to our employees or our competitions to always tell them, hey, I really trust my uncles, and we have a good relationship, so I'm going to want to talk to them. And the idea is when you're thinking about your business, I'm putting myself in another family business. If the older generation wants to pass the business to the next generation, everybody kind of has the same goal. They might have a different timeline or different style, but obviously the second generation or the older generation doesn't want to work for their entire career, or they don't want to work for their entire life, so they want to pass that at some point. And so you kind of have the same goals. So the idea is to really trust in both and build that trust, and really go the extra mile to have each other's back or whatever in public. So it's okay to have disagreements in private, but the idea is that we want to make sure that we're showing that we trust each other outside with the employees or with the consumer or the competition. On that, just one thing, if you guys are thinking that if there's any young people in the room, that if you come to a family business, one of the observations that I had, and my uncles will vouch for this, is that it surprises me how long it takes to work your way up through the family business. So I think that it's important before you start in a family business to say, this is going to take longer than you think it should. And then if you talk to the older generation, they're going to say, this is faster than we think it should. And so you got these two competing forces, but you want to know that before you start. So I've actually never met a transition plan where the younger generation is like, whoa, you guys are moving too fast for us. You're promoting me too fast. It's almost always the opposite. We're like, I'm still down here. I'm still working my way through the system. And so if you start in the program and you say, well, at least I know that it's going to be for me, it was 15 years. And you're like, at least I know it's going to be that long. It kind of gives you that perspective. So it goes back to trust, and it goes back to, the fact that we're just doing what's best for the business. And so, but you do need to have a realistic timeline. Like younger people, especially I'm Gen X, but I know the millennials, they're notorious for wanting to move real fast. And you would say, hey, let's have that expectation put out there. So if you're in the older generation, you might actually even just say in general, we're going to move slower, and that kind of helps people in that process to manage expectations. I'm going to wrap up quick, and then we can have questions. But the two last ones that I talked about is in that process of going through. So in the management track, we did all of the base jobs, and I have to tell you that my favorite job so far is actually my first job, which is driving a route truck. So we deliver chips. And it's the best job ever because it's like owning your own business. So you wake up and you deliver your product, and if you do everything that you need to do, you don't need a manager, and you don't need, if your customers have your cell phone, but if you take care of them, they're not going to be calling you. So it's one of those jobs that you can come, you can do a great job, and then when you park that truck, you're done for the day. And it's a really nice feeling, like it's a good job. That being said, some of the jobs that I had weren't that great of jobs. And you'd say, while you're in that job, be careful to enjoy the moment, because you can't get that moment back. And it sounds philosophical, but it's really more basic than that. So if you think about when I was working second shift packing boxes, and I'm working 12-hour days next to two different people, and those people, that's their job for their entire life, for a long time, and I'm doing it for a period of a year. After about 6 months, they start to let their guard down and be just real people and real, I get unfiltered feedback, or I just get the unfiltered person. And that's real. And you have to remember that you're not going to get that after you leave that position. So again, while it's 3 a.m. in the morning, you're packing boxes, you're having a conversation with that person. That's a real conversation. That's unfiltered feedback that you can be thinking, okay, this is how the people actually feel when I'm in their shoes, and I need to remember that for the future. So I can't get that back today. I can't go into the warehouse, and I know all the people, they're all the same people, and yet I hate to say that when I talk to them, I know that they have a filter up. They have something they're like, well, I don't necessarily want to vent like I did before, and that's okay. It's just one of those things you kind of have to know, and I wish I could have that back, but you can't. So when you look back on your career, you say, okay, those moments that you have that you're actually just peer-to-peer with people on the floor, learning the business, those are gold moments, and you want to make sure that you're learning as much as possible for that. So that's actually the last little observation. I did want to end with the Stephen Covey quote. So, Joe, we're not interested at all in your services, by the way, but we're not selling. But he talks about begin with the end in mind, and it's this back to building a legacy. So the thought I told you guys was that we wanted to come to Her's to build a legacy. And so when you start your career, you kind of think about like, okay, well, what would actually success look like? And so for me, I have all kinds of things that you would say, okay, I want to accomplish. But at the end of the day, I would classify success, and my cousins and I talk about this. I'm speaking for us as a collective group. We would classify success as that we have a healthy business and that we've trained and properly transitioned that business to the fourth generation. And then that fourth generation is doing better at running the business than we ever did. So that's our end goal in mind. So when you're, now obviously we haven't even transitioned all the way to the third generation, and I'm already talking about the fourth generation. So you're like, well, why are you doing that? The idea is that we want to make decisions based on trying to be, back at the end of the room where my Uncle Jim has transitioned that. He gave us a good business to run, and we're going to see what we can do. But the goal would be to pass that to the fourth generation. So with that, I know I took a little bit of time. I would love to hear you guys' observations and questions on, anything that you have about family business or anything that we can answer. I'm going to call my Uncle Ed up here, if you don't mind. Come help me out here on the chairs. And thank you guys for your time. So, Mike, do we have the mic here, or are you guys just going to talk loud? And if you don't answer any questions, then we can go to lunch. So, of course, we just had breakfast. Or you can have chips, yeah. And Ed was being bashful and talking about advertising, but we're working on a deal to sell chips. So we'll just go sell some chips afterwards.
All right, any questions?
Somebody.
Right up front, I saw you, I was like, I wanted you to come up earlier in the speech and say.
You just knew I was going to ask a question.
I did, I can't wait.
You talked a lot about the prerequisites for your entrance program for your management leadership track. Can you talk a little bit about your exit strategy for when it doesn't work out?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't know yet. We haven't had that. We've talked about how blessed we are. We haven't had that situation where someone fails. And I feel like we probably ought to have that conversation sooner or later. That and maybe me today, but the idea would be we don't have that planned out yet. We should.
Well, one of the things I was thinking when you asked that is that nobody on the leadership track is promised a leadership role. So every step along the way, they're kind of proving by manager endorsement, by our feedback, other people's customer feedback. They're kind of proving themselves. So Troy's right. Thankfully, we haven't had a situation where, we've had to say, well, you've kind of capped out here, but that could happen based on that process. Yeah. That makes sense? Yeah.
In the back?
Two questions. If somebody's decides to get into the track, but didn't have any outside management experience, would you send them out of the company then for 3-4 years? Have you had that situation?
Yes, we have. And they have to go and follow the 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Second question is, as you look to transition the president's role, is it automatically going to come out of the track, or will you also look at outside candidates?
So one of the jobs I've had, and thank goodness I have the privilege of working with the trustees, which are my brothers and sisters, is to kind of keep them posted all along the way how the different trackers are performing and what their strengths and weaknesses is. Somebody, I think it was Rick back here, when he was making his comments, he said, make sure you have the right people in the right seat on the right bus, right? So one of my jobs, along with their help, has been to say, which person do I think would be best in the president's role, a senior VP role, another senior VP role, that sort of thing. So we've announced already in our company that Troy's going to be the next president. So a year from now, I'm going to turn the president's role over to Troy. And then we already elevated 2 of his cousins into senior VP roles. So that was just based on kind of a collaborative view of, it just so happens in our case that Troy's the oldest also, but it was kind of a collaborative view of, who's the right person in the right spot. And we started, you guys, a lot of you are wiser than we are trying to figure this stuff out, but we started with the end in mind, as Troy said, like let's try to figure this out in such a way that all the people on the track agree with us. Like who would they want to put in the top spot? And that's a little tricky because everybody's going to say, well, I'm the guy, I want to do that. But at the end of the day, I think we accomplished our goal. I think everybody feels good where they are and at least sees the reasoning and agrees with it. So I hope that answers your question.
So it's interesting to know, several months ago we had the CEO of McElhenney and Company, Tabasco here, and they have 4 family members in the business, and you guys are sort of the polar opposite of that. All are welcome. How and maybe this will be more of an issue when the next generation comes along, because it's not going to be 78 people, it's going to be whatever, 150 or something like that. And in a 15-person company or 1,500-person company, you have some more latitude perhaps, but how do you manage kind of the expectations within the family as to where they can go? Obviously you have the management track, but do you find fallout, or is it a self-policing kind of thing? Because that can be a lot of mouths to feed.
Don't you say? Let me try.
Well, I guess when you have pretty regular communication, like when we have our shareholder meetings and things like that, we're a close enough family. And it's not unwieldy. It's not like there's all these people, but we're a close enough family that we kind of have a sense for who's even interested in coming to work for the company. Troy is an expert at recruiting interest. He just doesn't have an off button. He's just like, I don't care what you're doing, where you're working, how happy you are. If you're ever interested in coming to work for our company, we want to talk to you. That kind of thing. And I love that. I think that's the way we should be. But so far, we haven't had that situation happen, I don't think, Troy, where it feels like, oh my gosh, we have so much interest and we don't have enough space for everybody. So I really don't know what you do if you're in that situation. I guess, that would be unique for us, but I don't think we have that. Do you think?
I do. It's actually very easy. We need to grow. So if we make it 15,000 people,
there you go.
And then we have the family growing along, then that would help. But yeah, that's the easy answer to.
That's a good answer, Troy.
Yeah.
Grow the business.
Yeah.
was going to tell you while we have a quick break here, while you're thinking of your next question, that I was talking to one person in the room, and he said, "Who keeps you straight? Like, who holds you accountable? That sort of thing. You know, where do you learn what you have to do to improve and be better and be your best and that sort of thing?" And I was telling him, he said, "You should share this." I said, "Well, for me, it's kind of nice because we have the board of trustees and then we have the board of directors, and these people are very good at what they do. They're good at asking questions. For instance, at the last board meeting in October, they did an evaluation of me, and one of the big things that came out is that you need to hold people more accountable, you know. And so I've been thinking about accountability. You know, where is that? And I was telling this gentleman that accountability comes from all kinds of different areas. And first of all, if you're trying to do your best, you want to hear, you know, how you can do better. Like, that's just, it becomes part of your DNA. Like, how can I be more successful? Like, it's great when people come up to you and say, "Oh, good job, Troy, you did a great job speaking." That's great. It's nice to hear that. But what's really valuable, if somebody says, "You know, I was thinking about how you could do that a little bit better." And so we have a multitude. I have the board of directors, I have the trustees, and then recently, after 20 years of being single, I got married. And you want to talk about accountability? I mean, Eddie's got a whole new set of rules here. But seriously, people that love you the most, your spouse or your children, can deliver the most gut-wrenching, you know, heart-stopping things. You know, you really need to think about not being so selfish, right? You really need to think about not being so proud or something like so. So accountability comes from. Anyway, I hope I shared that the way it was asked.
That's good, by the way. That's good.
I was curious about ownership. Who owns shares, and what's the process of shares moving to other people? How do you buy in?
Yep.
Or,
Yep, that's another thing. By the way, if you have any really deep questions like that, ask my brother after the meeting. But he's really been a great person for estate planning, working on that. And our parents, our dad especially, was really intent that every family member should have equal distribution. So that's just the way we started. Now, things happen over the years where people, you know, sell stock, or, you know, you can buy stock in the company if you want to. Troy could buy more shares, or I could buy more shares. But that's where we started. We started with the idea of kind of equality. And then, I'm not sure I heard the second part of your question.
how do you transfer shares? Like
We transfer.
if I'm a grand shop and I say, "Hey, I want
Yeah.
shares," like, how does that all work?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that, and I'm not an expert on it, but we can all transfer, I think it's up to $15,000 worth of stock every year to individual family members. And then there's grats, you know, if you want to skip a generation and give stock that way, and then you take advantage of the appreciation. So that's how we do it. It's pretty simple, I think. Yeah. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
But anybody in the family can own shares.
Yeah, I
Absolutely,
mean,
yep.
I have a picture in my office of all of us that were at the retreat, so 65 or 70 of us, and all of those family members that are smiling in that picture of my bosses are either shareholders or they're going to be shareholders. I mean, the intent is that everybody in the family becomes a shareholder, and that's, you know, I mean, we don't have any exceptions so far. What else?
So, I mean, the family, the growth of the family, the growth of the family and the growth of the, it's fine. I'm going to use it. So, trying to align the growth of the family and the growth of the business. I mean, not align. You cannot say
Right.
the family don't grow that fast, right? Because, you know, keeping up. But at the same time, you know, you find and you discover talent among your non-family members. And you cannot pass on it. You say, hey, this is really important for us. So what's the dynamic there? Family talent versus non-family talent. So,
Would you like me to take a stab at that?
Yeah.
We absolutely encourage non-family talent. In fact, the majority of the people on the executive committee that work for Ed are our non-family, and we realize that they have a tremendous value. In fact, we were talking in the back, it's not against the rules in our family constitution to have an outside president run the business. Like, it's against the rules in our family constitution to sell our business. And in a perfect world, we would continue to have family members that would be qualified and really good at the jobs. But the first step is that we want to keep our business healthy. And so, but we haven't had that situation yet, but we definitely have, like our CFO, human resources, they're all outside family members, or outside, and highly qualified from Fortune 500 companies, that kind of thing.
And the second question is, what's your policy regarding the in-laws? Some family will call them outlaws.
Yeah. Well, my wife works for the company. My uncle, who's an in-law, is a senior vice president for our company. So we actually count in-laws exactly the same.
The same
Yep.
same policy. Thank you very much.
I'll ask you a question. You guys are obviously going to third generation. You're 250 million plus company. You have a lot of good governance in place. But a lot of our members, we do surveys, only 15% have a succession plan, both from a leadership and an ownership perspective. So, especially your perspective, Ed, how did you start this thing when it was just, you and your dad and your siblings? What would you do to encourage someone who doesn't have any plan? What do they do to start?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike, and I can't really take a lot of credit for that. That would be a better question for JM, but I guess just the thought of, if you love the business and you love the experience of working with brothers and sisters and parents or that sort of thing, it seems like it's almost an automatic thing you would wake up with, is to say, look, how are we gonna do this as I get older? Some people, I think, I don't know, maybe you get in that mindset that you just think you're going to live forever or something. You just don't think about it. But I'm sure there has to be times when people think, how are we going to perpetuate this good experience that we have, this continuing legacy? And in our case, it's kind of I don't know, it becomes part of your DNA. You just kind of feel like this is what we're about, and it's an opportunity to keep things going that are kind of a testimony of what we stand for and how we treat people and that sort of thing. So you want to do everything you can to just perpetuate a healthy continuance of that blessing that you've been stewards of. So it's a little bit of a tough question, but I think that's what I would say, Mike. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you said it well.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Here's one over here.
So this is really more of a comment, since we seem to be drawing questions right now. You said something earlier about the blessings provided to 1,500 people through work, and I think that that's kind of a thing for me that all of us should be, I don't think prideful about, but mindful of the fact that, and this is one of the things that bugs me about when we talk about social enterprise and that sort of thing. All these companies are providing the blessings of work to people, and I think we ought to be mindful about that. So I thank you for bringing that up. But I also wanted to say that I've been involved with some local organizations, and my local high school booster club in particular, and you guys go over and above that, and we're very generous with donations and the like, and I wanted to just acknowledge that and appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great opportunity to give back, isn't it?
This is just an observation and sort of a question of how you build it. It's really nice to see just how you defer to each other, and I'm sure that's kind of down through the organization. How, and more to Troy, how does that continue as the generations change and as you get further away? Because the deference I see just between the two of you, I can tell. It's very genuine. So how do you intentionally build that other than the once-a-year shareholder meetings and things like that? Just how does that stay?
That's a great question. We're actually working on that right now. So our grandparents were so good at bringing the family together. We have this long history of being friends with our cousins. And we're not, well, I mean, it's a small town, but the people that are our cousins, like we've gone through life together. So it's not like in some families where you see your cousins once a year or whatever. I mean, we were seeing them all the time, going to school, stuff like that. So the question is, as the family gets bigger, and now we're in our fourth generation that have people that own houses in other states, and there's a lot of people in California, and you would say, like, how are we going to keep all of those connections? And that's really a big challenge for us. So we don't have it all figured out, so I'd say that would be step one in the process. Step two is we absolutely want to do whatever we can as cousins to stay as tight as we can. And we have that foundation that our grandparents gave us. But passing it to the fourth generation, like I have two 9-year-old boys that didn't live that way. And so it's up to us to keep that family together and use the business as an opportunity to keep the family together. And that's our plan.
I add two things to that. And the first one is, I don't want to puff Troy up too much, but he's really good at, I think, at running what I think will be a much flatter organization. In other words, from the top, I think Troy will be the kind of leader that really involves his cousins as peers and lets them help run the company. Like he's not going to have this structure that's like, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the leader here, and you'll do. So I think that is going to create, I think his approach to that is one of the things I love about him. I think he's going to really be good at making everyone feel like they're part of it. And the other thing I would say is he, starting here, and I forget if we said a year or two, we're going to transition from my brother Jim and my leadership on the family council to Troy's leadership. And I guess maybe my daughter Crystal might be helping him with that. She's going to be our assistant. But they're going to try to figure out how to take that family council to the next level, right? Where some of the things he was talking about is going to come through that council, where they're going to engage the third generation family and non-family members to say, hey, how can we help people that don't even work for the company be part of the company? That's one of the things JM's daughter asked at the last shareholder meeting. Say, hey, I don't work for the company, but I'd love to be more a part of it somehow. So how do we do that? Do we send them samples that they can give to their neighbors, or what? Yep. That sort of thing. So I think that's another.
Ed, we talk a lot in our peer groups about outside directors as directors of a company. You actually have 3 levels, which would be management, a board of directors, and then family council trustees. My question is on really significant risk-bearing decisions that affect the long term, whether it's major acquisitions or major product change or whatever. Who has the control in those decisions? Is it the directors, the board of directors, or does the family council get involved in that? How do they work in terms of those kind of governance issues?
Yeah, I think it would, in most cases, the scenario you painted there would be the board of directors, would be the ones that say, okay, we approve the idea of spending $20 million on this. We approve this acquisition, this building expansion, whatever. The place where it kind of divides is when it comes to people. If it has to do with an executive leader, like hiring or firing, that more or less falls on the CEO to make those decisions, and I like to bounce those things off of the trustees. But so that's kind of the way I would see that. Yeah. Yep.
And the trustees
Go ahead.
hire the board of directors. So that's their job, is to pick good board of directors like Mike. Then, in theory, they make the major decisions.
But our trustees also are establishing what their shareholder expectation is to the board. So say, this is where we think the profit margin should be. This is, we'd like to grow in this area or that area, that sort of thing.
Question here on regards. Okay. Question here in regards to your position in the marketplace. This, in a way, steps out of family as a question, although as a closely held family company. What are the greatest challenges you see in the over-competitive, aggressive food marketplace?
Brother, good grief. Talk about taking a turn.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, hey, the good news is, this is my relative over here in some ways. The good news is that snacking is up. Like we're living in a day and age where people are on the go. They're going to continue to be on the go, and so snacking is very, very healthy. The other part of that is that everybody wants a piece of it. So it doesn't matter if you're Campbell Soup or Hershey Foods or Kraft or Nabisco or Frito-Lay, they want a piece of it. So we have a ton of competition. And in our business, it's a little bit hard to differentiate. You're always trying to have, unique flavors or somebody mentioned here, God bless them, we have the best cheese curl. And I do think we have the best cheese curl on the market. The best kettle chips. I mean, I could go on and on, trust me. But, that's what's difficult, trying to say, what is your point of difference? And actually, in this group, I would say, let's not forget that one point of difference is our culture. One point of difference is that we're a family business and we're relatively small and we can be nimble and we can make decisions quicker than these conglomerates can. And Troy, you chime in on this too. But so, the whole, world today is interested in doing business with a family. They're interested in somebody that has values and wants to give back to the community and those kind of things. Now, sometimes it's just a ticket to the game, but at least it's something. So we try to build on that. Quality, Troy's in charge of our quality right now, among other people, obviously. But, we have to have top-notch quality out there day in and day out. The best quality. We try to give the best service we possibly can. I would say we get the highest marks in our industry for service. And that's something that we control. We have company-owned routes. We try to keep it that way so that we have good relationships and good communication there. What am I not thinking of, Troy? Add to it.
Interested, because I think your question also was talking about the changing marketplace. So we have lots of competition, but and we could raise our hands, but how many of you guys shop at Amazon? Like little place like that, right? That's changing how we deliver potato chips. So, obviously if we go to the grocery store business is going to change over the years, and we're watching that. And we're investing in e-commerce, but also watching as our partners. And the market is really changing. You guys might have heard of a little company called Dollar General. They're on every street corner. They're everywhere, and that's something that wasn't here 10 years ago. So we are watching the competition and obviously deliver to all of those people. So one of the things that when you have a DSD, which we call direct store delivery network of trucks, is that you can deliver to everybody. So that's helpful. Like as the business changes, we can kind of fluctuate and move with that business. But we're watching it. We don't know where the future's heading.
That's good. One of the things we always have to be concerned about is the health conscious consumer. So big push on sugar. Soda, the Coke, and Pepsi, and these guys have to try to figure out how we could sell more water and fruit juices and that sort of thing. And so we have that issue too. We have that issue where people say, hey, we got to watch our carbs and that sort of thing, salt, that sort of. But the good news for us is that it seems like that at the same time people are concerned about their health and weight, that sort of thing. They're also very active. So this millennial group is a very active group of people, and they love to treat themselves to a snack or to social occasion. So that works in our favor. So yeah, there's a lot of. That's a good question.
Yeah.
We could go on and on about
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely that was a great question, especially with Hershey trying to position it as a snacking company today. It puts more competitive pressure, but there is hope, as you said. I'm looking at my students, they are constantly snacking. Some of them, they get a title as Chief Munching Officer in my classes.
God bless them.
Throughout the class, they keep doing that, yeah. Now, my next question, although we are going to have lunch with my students too in a few minutes, but another question which I believe is important came up in my classes too is with the new generation. You are moving now to the Cousins Consortium. So everybody's doing a great job to build on the, on the legacy of, the previous generation. But at the same time, you bring new values, right? The new generation, the new perception. So what are the new values that you try to enrich the culture? And are there any potential maybe conflicts there or anything like that?
See, that's that loaded question. He's fishing, right? He's looking for, no. So we, at this moment, are very blessed. So the people that are in our third generation are very, very similar to our second generation, very similar. So Christian Values is the company was built on that, and we still adhere to that in the third generation. So from that standpoint, we haven't had any value change. The one thing that I can tell you that we did that helps me is that we have our values written down. And so I don't know if you're in a business that you would say, have you taken that time to write down what matters to the owners of the business? And really, and with a family like ours, I remember it took a while to get it all, like we had to have an outside person like kind of give us advice on how to think in terms of writing our values down and stuff like that. But that's something that then we go over in the shareholder meetings and say, these are the family values. Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? Because it could happen that people change or people get married into the family that don't have our values and that want to run our business. And we would say like that actually could be a cultural problem that we would then want to address really open and honest and upfront and early in that. But it could happen in the fourth generation. There's no question that as the family grows, you have just more personalities and more views and things like that. So values are the core of our business, and we have them, we have to protect that, I would say.
I was thinking about an add-on to a question that Mike asked here about the fact that 15% of people do succession planning. Is that what you said? That was the stat. And I was thinking, if you're running a family business, probably, you're thinking it's scary to embrace conflict, and it's scary to think about how could I do this planning because I wouldn't know where to start or how it's going to affect people and all that. And I bet you that's a big deterrent to some people. And I would just say, as a word of encouragement, it's not scary. It's actually, there's a lot of professionals, probably a lot of them in this room, that know how to help you and can come alongside of you. And it's actually going to be a great journey to go down, and it'll make you better as a company, stronger, whichever direction you go. So I don't think I'd be afraid of it, which maybe some people are just it's just overwhelming sometimes when you think about, I love this person. I don't want to talk about, her being the boss or him being the boss. I don't want to talk about that, but it can be okay. It can be just fine. Make your family stronger. Are we all good?
Well, thank you for your attention. I want to say that I get blessed to work with a lot of family businesses, and I can tell you this family is second to none. I mean, the professionalism with which they approach their business, but more importantly, the way they get along as family. They just really care for each other, and they like each other. And, to protect that, and I think today I kind of understand why. I heard love, humility, trust, hard work. That's what it takes. And all came from a foundation of a man who clearly, and a mother who clearly demonstrated that. And I think that's what you want to protect. That's the secret sauce. Culture trumps each strategy for lunch. As a family business, that's what you have. but you have to be intentional about it. So I was so happy that these guys agreed to come up here and talk about it, because they have done that. They've created a system to capture that, and if you're not intentional about it, it's going to go away. They're into the 3rd generation. I'll bet they're going to get to the 4th generation, because it didn't happen by accident. They were intentional about it. And the family can take over in leadership, again, if you're intentional about it. If you're not mentoring the family to be leaders, then they can't wake up one day and just take over. So thanks for both of you guys being here. Let's give them a round of applause. And